Happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary. Pour a cheerful toast and fill it, happy anniversary. But be careful you don't spill it, happy anniversary. Oh, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Holy crack-a-mole, folks. On February 3rd, 2015, the Appraiser Coach Podcast launched with its initial and first episode. Here we are, 5 years. I was going to say long years, but actually it's flown fast. 5 years later, here we are. There are over 500 episodes of the Appraiser Coach Podcast, folks. That is nearly, believe it or not, 750,000 downloads. Take that in for a second. 750,000 downloads of the Appraiser Coach Podcast, and I owe it all to you, my listeners. Here's how the first episode started in February of 2015. And appraisers are just frustrated. They're doing more and more and more, and a lot of them are doing them for less and less and less money. And so my goal is to help you to turn that around. Well, folks, that's how it began 5 years ago today. The Appraiser Coach Podcast. Folks, this is going to be a fun show. I want to pause here and remind you that we are sponsored by four. We're going to talk about all of our sponsors here. Five sponsors today. Don't worry, we'll make them quick, but I have to give a special shout out and a hats off to each of these companies. They've been with me, most of them from the very, very beginning. Alamode, of course, is the software I've been using for over 20 years. They've been helping out appraisers for 30 years. Alamode.com or 800 Alamode. Datamaster. Datamaster is saving you 30 to 60 minutes per report. You can find them at datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. We are sponsored by Working RE Magazine. That's where I get my information about the appraisal world. That's where you should as well, in addition, of course, to the Appraiser Coach Podcast. You can find them at workingre.com, workingre.com. OREP Insurance is my E&O. OREP is the E&O that I've been using for several years, and they have been great. OREP.org. Finally, ANOW Software is the software that I am using to manage my appraisal business. You can find them at anow.com/coach, anow.com/coach. Okay, folks. Wow, this is exciting. It truly is. It's kind of crept up on me, to be honest with you. I wasn't really paying attention. And the other day I just had this thought, gee, I wonder where we're at on our episodes. And I started looking, and I'll be honest with you, number 500 came and went. I didn't even really see it coming. And I don't really pay that close of attention to the episode numbers. And I thought, 500. And I started doing the math. And I do a little over 100 episodes a year. And I thought, wait a minute. Am I coming up on an anniversary? And sure enough, here we are, 5-year anniversary of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Folks, I cannot even tell you how exciting this ride has been. Had no idea it would be what it is when I started, honestly. I had hoped it would be this big. I had hoped that we would have the listenership that we have. I would hope that we have the great information being put out there to appraisers, but I had no idea. Podcasting has not been around for very long, and I had no clue that we would be here now 5 years later and doing our episode celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Well, folks, here's what I would like to do today. I thought, man, wouldn't it be fun to go through the list of the most popular episodes of the Appraiser Coach Podcast over the last 5 years? Wouldn't it be fun to see where we are with our numbers, to our statistics, and see which episodes were most important to you, the appraiser? And so I went back and did a little research. Okay, let's be honest. My virtual assistant did a little research and came up with the top 5. Okay, this is going to be an episode of 5's 5-year anniversary, top 5 episodes of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Then we're going to do our top 5 sponsors, right? And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the 5 things that I have learned over the last 5 years of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. All right, so we're going to do this in top 5 standard fashion. We're going to start with number 5 and we're going to move down the list. You ready for this? Here we go. Number 5. This one goes out to my good friend Tim Anderson. This was called Tim Anderson on the USPAP certification. This is episode number 303. And Tim and I talked about the certifications and what we should be putting in appraisal reports. Folks, this was before Tim and I were doing the Dear USPAP Instructor. And it was super fun to have Tim on from the very beginning. He has always been so kind and so willing to share his time and his expertise with you, the listeners. So Tim, thank you. Number 303, Tim Anderson on the USPAP certifications. Number 4. This one goes out to my good friends over at Appraiser e-Learning. This is number 337, and the title was Appraisers and ANSI Measuring Standards. We talked, of course, in that episode with Mr. Hal Humphreys. We talked with John Dingman, and we talked about the ANSI standard. What is the American National Standard Institute? How does it apply to appraisers? Do you use a measuring standard when you perform on-site observations? And we talked, of course, with individuals that are much smarter than myself, Mr. John, Mr. Hal, talking about ANSI standards. And again, that is number 337, Appraisers and ANSI Measuring Standards. By the way, one of the reasons I'm doing the top 5 list, in addition to it being my 5-year anniversary, is I hope that you'll go back and listen to some of these great episodes. I hope that if you've joined us in the last year or so, maybe a couple years, that you go back and realize that if you are on, I think Stitcher Radio does it. I definitely know that iTunes does it. I checked before I started recording today. And if nothing else, you can go to the Appraiser Coach Podcast or theappraisercoach.com, click on the podcast button, and you can scroll down to the very beginning and listen to every single episode. I kid you not, about 2 weeks ago, I got a message. I think it was a Facebook message from an individual who friended me on Facebook and reached out and said, Dustin, I have listened to every single episode of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. And I thought, wow, that is pretty impressive. That is pretty impressive. Okay, number three. This one was a bit controversial for me, simply because a la mode had been a sponsorship for a very long time. And of course, there were some people very up in arms with the fact that CoreLogic purchased a la mode. And I put out a special episode on number 321. The episode is called, Is There a Silver Lining? In parentheses, or 3, question mark. End of parentheses, with CoreLogic's purchase of a la mode. Folks, this went into the multi-thousands of downloads. I think people wanted to find out what it was that I thought about the purchase of a la mode from CoreLogic. And by the way, if you go back and listen to that episode, you will find that much of what I talked about in that episode has come to pass. I think individuals were a little bit overly worried about the purchase. And as you can see there, you're still a sponsor here. I am still using a la mode, still love the software. And there you go. Number 321, is there a silver lining, or 3, with CoreLogic's purchase of a la mode? All right, number 2. We're getting there, folks. Number 2. This one really goes into a lot of what I talk about as the Appraiser Coach. This is number 315, and the title is, What is the Future of Appraising? Now, this aired on March 6th, 2018, and this one was all about the new landscape with appraisals. We were seeing a lot of bifurcated products. We were seeing a lot of desktops coming on, and I spent some time talking about what I saw, my predictions, my crystal ball, if you will, as to what was going to be happening in the next 3 to 5 years in the appraisal world. That was a very popular episode. Again, number 315, what is the future of appraisal? All right, folks, number 1. Goes out to a good friend of mine, and I think he might be surprised to hear this. This was the number 1 most downloaded episode ever of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. In fact, it really honestly dwarfs, it is about double number 2. Remember, number 2 was what is the future of appraising. This one, the number of downloads almost very closely doubled the number of downloads, okay? This is episode number 143, The Dangerous Jobs of Comp Photos with no less than Mr. Mark Skapanitz. So Mark Skapanitz, hats off to you. The most listened to episode ever on the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Number 143 aired in July 29th, specifically 2016, folks, 4 years ago, The Dangerous Job of Comp Photos with Mark Skapanitz. By the way, that was the first time the Mr. Mark Skapanitz, from what I remember, remind me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mark, but I believe that was the first time that the Scap was on my appraisal podcast. Wow. What a run. Number 143, top trophy goes to Mr. Mark Skapanitz for the most downloaded episodes, The Most Dangerous Job of Comp Photos with Mr. the Scap. By the way, of course, Mark Skapanitz has gone on to great success on his own. He's got his own podcast now. Great show. If you've not checked it out, you need to. It is a great show to listen to. And folks, that is the top 5 episodes for the last 5 years of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. All right, folks, let's talk about the top 5 sponsors. In fact, the only 5 sponsors that I have had, other than I used to do some goofy pretend sponsors here. But folks, these companies have been with me from the very beginning. My hat's off to each of them. Thank you. Thank you. You've made the Appraiser Coach Podcast happening and able to continue. First, of course, a la mode. A la mode is the software that I've been using from the very beginning of my career. I will continue to use it as it continues to provide value for what I do. alamode.com or 800 Alamode is where you get a hold of them. Datamaster, my good friends over at Datamaster. Folks, I've had lunch several times with Datamaster. Love hanging out with them at the conferences. These are great people who really do care about you, the appraiser. They're trying to make your life easier by shortening the time that it takes to, put data in your report, something you've got to do anyway. 30 to 60 minutes per report is what they're going to save you, and you can check them out at datamasterusa.com. Again, it's datamasterusa.com. OREP Insurance is the E&O that I switched over to, partway through the podcast. And I tell you, folks, I don't advertise anything that I don't use, and I don't advertise anything that I don't love. And OREP was a great move for me. They have been a great blessing to me. The benefits that they give you in addition to the E&O are absolutely fabulous and amazing. You can check them out by going to orep.org. One more time, it's orep.org. Working RE Magazine, of course, has been a sponsor from the very beginning as well. By the way, folks, let me just stop and just say this. These sponsors jumped on board before I even had a podcast. All right, let that sink in for a second. How cool is that? I reached out to these companies. I said, hey, listen, I'm going to try something new. There was no such thing as an appraiser podcast at the time. There was no proof in the pudding. I reached out to these companies and I said, hey, would you sponsor your company? Would it sponsor the Appraiser Coach Podcast? And every one of them, without hesitation, has jumped on board. I have never raised their prices over 5 years. They have had a mutual agreement from the very beginning, and it's been a good fit. The Appraiser Coach teaches about efficiencies, effectiveness, and doing things better, and learning and educating yourself. All of these companies fit into that. Working RE being another one. Isaac, of course, and David over there at Working RE from the very beginning. You can find them at workingre.com. One more time, it's workingre.com. Folks, ever since I started doing minisodes, Now has been a sponsor of minisodes. Now, that has not been the whole time that I've been doing the Appraiser Coach Podcast, but I think we started those, 4 to 6 months in, and Now jumped on board right away. They've been a great sponsor here. The great people over at Now Software, that's the software I use on a daily basis. Every day, I'm in A Now, checking out my analytics, checking out what my business is doing. Just yesterday, I was on a coaching call with an individual, and he said, so I hear you talk a lot about A Now software. Talk to me about that. And I have no problem selling A Now software. It is a godsend for my business. It will be for yours as well. anow.com/coach. One more time, it's anow.com/coach. All right, folks, we are back. We are, 5 years of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. February 3rd, 2015 is when the podcast started. Here we are 5 years later, almost 750,000. That's MILLION, 750,000 listens over the last 5 years. I'm super proud and can't thank you enough, listeners. All right, folks, I want to do something a little fun here as we close up today and talk about the 5 things that I've learned over the last 5 years. Now, this is a bit of a misnomer because some of these things I kind of knew, but they've just been driven home more and more and more. These are principles that I have found as I have tried to get information out to appraisers. And it is interesting to look back and see some of the episodes in the very beginning. By the way, quite embarrassed about some of those episodes in the very beginning. They were a learning experience for me, let's put it that way. And I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and super fun as well. But these are lessons that have come up over and over and over again. So if you'll indulge me for just a few more minutes, I want to share with you the 5 things that I have learned over the last 5 years as the host of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. First of all, let's do a couple of negative ones, all right? Let's start out with a negative. First of all, lesson number 1, you can't please everyone. Folks, from the very beginning, I have received hate mail. I've had a nemesis out there by the pseudonym of Bill, who I know is obviously a real individual, but that's not his real name. He refuses to give me his real name. But I'll be honest with you, folks, the first time I got negative email from individuals and messages, I'll be honest, it kind of bothered me. It really did. In fact, I remember one specific day, we were up in Yellowstone National Park, and it was in the very, very beginning of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. We started again in February 2015, and I think this was about May of 2015, and I was getting some negative hate mail, and I don't even remember which episode it was, but somebody was reaching out to me, and I was in Yellowstone Park, and the connection was bad, and we were, going around and enjoying as a family as we were trying to enjoy the park. And about every stop, I would regain Wi-Fi, right? I would regain connection. And all of a sudden, the email would come in, and all these negative responses. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And I felt bad. I'll be honest with you. It bothered me. And that day was ruined. That day was ruined for me because all of this negative hate mail. I thought, geez, is it that bad? Do I need to rethink what I'm doing? Now, folks, luckily, I didn't take it to heart. Luckily, I internalized it so far as to say, you know what? Everybody's got their opinion, and that's okay. In the very beginning, I used to save all my hate mail. I had a email with a folder that was labeled hate mail, and that thing just was getting full and full and full. Okay, here's the thing. Okay, in addition to principle number 1 that you can't please everyone, I also learned to not let it bother me. And it really doesn't anymore. Now, I read every email you send me. I read every message that you message to me. I do. And I get a lot, several a day. Let's put it that way. I read and I try to respond to everything. But I'll tell you, if it's negative, it's not going to bother me anymore. I certainly will learn. If I've done something wrong, if I've said something wrong, I certainly will take and internalize that and grow and develop on my own. But I'm not going to let it bother me. And so that's been a lesson. In addition to you can't please everyone, Dustin, don't let it bother you. Number 2, people are going to make assumptions. Okay, principle number 2, people are going to make assumptions. Now, this kind of reflects on number 1, okay, that you can't please everyone. But it's interesting the assumptions that people have made over the years. I have been called a shill for the AMC. I had to even look that up. What does a shill even mean? Right? Okay. I've been told that my sponsors bias me, that I can't say certain things. In fact, it's interesting how often I will do a coach call and someone will say to me, like they did, and I mentioned earlier with the Now software, okay, Dustin, since we're confidential here, we're off the record, tell me really how you feel about a la mode software. Tell me really how you feel about Data Master or Now or Working RE Magazine or OREP Insurance. Folks, my answer has always been the same. What you hear here on this microphone is what you're going to hear from me when I know nobody else is listening. Okay? I will shoot straight with you. I will tell you the way it is. You will get the honest to goodness truth here on the Appraiser Coach Podcast. So number 2, people are going to make assumptions. And I would follow up and say, let them make them. All right, let's talk a little bit about the positive side. Okay? Principle number 3. Now, this is a lesson that I knew in the beginning, but it has become more cemented over time. And that is, I don't have competition. Okay, let me repeat that. Principle number 3 that I've learned over the last 5 years is I don't have competition. What does that mean, Dustin? Well, folks, I know a lot of you see what's going on out there in the world. You see, let's talk first about appraisers, right? I don't feel that I have competition when it comes to appraisals. I am in competition with myself. Every year, I want to be and do a little bit better than I was and did last year. Okay, I'm always trying to up my game. I'm always trying to become more efficient, more effective, a better place to work. Okay, those things I'm constantly in competition with. But when it comes to other appraisers in my area, honestly, I don't even think about them. I really don't. The same is true right here on the Appraiser Coach Podcast. I welcome all of you great new podcasters out there. Tim Anderson has a great podcast out there. As I mentioned earlier, Mark Skapanitz has a great new podcast. Jamie Owen has a great new podcast. There's other podcasts out there. Those are the ones that come to the top of my head at this time. Folks, I don't see those individuals as competition. I see those individuals as great individuals who have something to offer. Listen to them. I will push you toward them. Folks, it's not a single piece of pie and every piece that's taken is one piece away from someone else. I love the growth. I love the expansion. My mindset is always about expansion and not about diminishing returns. Folks, I love the fact that there are other individuals out there. And if any of you need any help with the podcast, please reach out to me. I would be thrilled to share any expertise that I possibly could. Okay. All right. Number 4. We're getting there. Number 4. Podcasting can and should be real. Okay. Now let me tell you a true story. This is me being a little bit vulnerable. Okay. I was scared to death to turn on the microphone the first time. Truly. I thought about it for months and months and months. I was already doing kind of a podcast that wasn't public for a very long time. In fact, for about a year before I launched publicly, I had been doing what I called a mastermind, but it was more of a podcast that was being sent out to select individuals. Okay, so I had a little time behind the microphone. Yes, I did. Don't laugh. I did do a little DJing in college. Okay, not a whole lot, never any good, but I did do the all request and dedication show on Friday nights. Yeah, but as far as my expertise, I was worried very, very much. I was worried that people would turn off. I was worried that people wouldn't listen. I was worried that it wouldn't sound good. And in the beginning, I spent hours, this was long before I had a VA, I spent hours on every episode basically taking care of the ums and the uhs and the flub ups and everything else, okay? And then I realized, you know what? People just want it raw. People want no polish. People want to hear my opinions. In fact, I started putting my flub ups in the Easter eggs at the end of the episode. Okay, every once in a while you'll hear those now. Folks, when I hear listeners, or when I meet listeners rather, I love the fact that they already know me. Just this week, I had a new coaching client, started Wednesday morning, and I was up at 7 a.m. I was on the video chat, and the first thing he said to me, and it was a little bit embarrassing, but the first thing he said to me was, "Wow, I feel like I already know you." I love that. Absolutely love that. How cool is that? somebody who had been listening, someone who had cared enough about my opinions to keep listening. It's one thing to listen once. It's another thing to keep listening. And so principle number 4 is podcasting can and should be real. It should be like a conversation. Okay. If any of you are looking to start a podcast, that would be my first suggestion to you, that you keep it real, that you don't worry about the ums, that you don't worry about the polish, that you don't worry about maybe you're having a down day and you seem a little monotone. That's okay. It's okay. I've got my ups. I've got my downs. People want it real. They want the behind the scenes. They just want to hear your opinions. All right, here we go. The last one. The last principle that I learned over the last 5 years of doing the Appraiser Coach podcast is that people are good. They truly are. People are forgiving. People are patient. People are friendly. For everybody that's out there sending me hate mail, there's 10 other people saying thank you for your opinions. A lot of people, it's so interesting how often people will send me private notes and say, listen, I didn't want to say this publicly. I don't want to paint a target on my back like you do, but thank you for saying what you said last week. That is cool. That is awesome. It takes some courage, not a whole lot, okay? I certainly wouldn't put myself in the place of people who have a real courageous job, right? But it does take some courage to put yourself out there, and I appreciate the fact that people are good. Appreciate the fact that people are friendly and forgiving and patient and everything else, and it has been quite the ride. All right, folks. I hesitated doing this. I still wonder if I should, because I know I'm going to forget some of you. And I apologize for that. But I do, in the end here, want to give a final shout out to a few people who have really made the Appraiser Coach podcast what it is. Now, again, I'm gonna repeat. I am not going to get everybody. Okay. And so if you don't hear your name, I apologize. And let me just say that anybody who has ever put themselves out and have been on the Appraiser Coach podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you. But I do owe a special thank you to those that have been on multiple times and who have been great contributors to this podcast. I mentioned a couple of them already. Mark Skapinitz, thank you. You've been on several times. You and I are good friends. You've been to my mastermind group. Thank you. John Dingman, willing to put himself out there even as an employee of an AMC, was willing to go to his boss and say, hey, I want to talk on the Appraiser Coach podcast, and everything I say may not necessarily reflect this AMC. Is that okay? So thank you, John, for putting yourself out there. I appreciate your friendship. John and I ran into each other just on a fluke in Chicago a couple years ago, and that was fun to see him and catch up with him. Brian Reynolds, who I just thank you, Brian. Your enthusiasm, the spark in your eye. I love, you're one of the best teachers out there, Brian, and thank you for being on the podcast several times, making it what it is. Of course, Hal Humphreys, Mike Brunson, Ann O'Rourke, George Dell, Joan Trice, Keith Ellis, Roy Meyer. Again, talking about competition, I don't see Roy as competition at all. Here's a guy who's willing to share his expertise. He and I are good friends, and I admire Roy over the last couple of years with his family traveling the world and continuing to give back to the appraiser community. Ernie Durbin, good friend of mine, been on the program several times. Blaine Fyan, relative newcomer to the podcasting world, but giving some great advice to individuals out there. Thank you, Blaine, for your friendship, and again, for not seeing me and vice versa as competition. Great guy. Joel Baker, of course, David Bronner and Isaac Peck over at Working RE Magazine, been on several times. Mark Bueller, Craig Morley, and of course, I cannot end without a heartfelt, I just love this guy, Mr. Tim Anderson, who has given everything to this podcast. Never been paid for being on the podcast. Put himself out there month after month and willingly given of his time and his expertise. And he never ceases to say, Dustin, I hope that you and your family are doing fine. He texts me constantly. Just, I love you, Tim. Thank you. Thank you. All of those who have contributed to the Appraiser Stories. And of course, I cannot close today without thanking Bill. Bill, seek the truth, buddy. Thank you, folks, for joining me. Once again, thank you for being a part of the Appraiser Coach podcast. Upward and onward. Let's go for 5 more.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach Podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
I will straight shoot with you. Straight shoot with you. I will shoot straight with you. 5 years, folks, and I still can't talk.